It's something. All right, welcome back to Resilient Voices and Beyond. I've heard some feedback that I need to get a catchphrase, so I'm working on that. I'm working on that, but until then, y'all gonna get this all right. You know? I'm so excited for today's episode. I have a very special person on here. Recently connected with her, and she's just a wonderful person. I believe this is episode 30 something. I've just been going with them and just doing it. So I don't know the right number. I'll probably figure that out by the end of this. But yeah, I'm excited. I appreciate the support and all that you guys have been doing, to rally around this podcast and the work that I've been doing. So without further ado, I'm going to have my guest introduce herself.
Yes, well, thank you, Michael, for having me. I'm super excited to be here. This is actually my first podcast, so this is fun, and such a great podcast to do for my first, discussion. So, yes, my name is Deborah Denzel, and I'm super excited to be here and share all that I can share, all of my experiences as a Foster Care alumni, as a child welfare professional, and the journey I've been on for, the last couple of decades. And so I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you. And I ask this question a lot, to lead us into it. I like to dive deep, and get a sense of the person behind the expertise and the brilliance, So if you could take us through when your experience started and what it was like.
Yeah, wow, that's a great question and a great way to start this discussion. So, before I can share my experience of being a part of foster care, I actually have to pause and highlight that my biological mother was a foster child along with her numerous siblings back in the day. And so my biological mother had gone into care and pretty much back in the day aged out of the system. And fast forward many years later, I am the youngest of 5 children she had. I went into foster care around the age of, it was around 8 or 9. I actually am very interested in getting that date and knowing exactly how old was I, but I do know it's in between those 2 ages. And so I went into the Connecticut foster care system. I'm originally from Bridgeport, Connecticut. And I went into the system because of neglect and specifically poverty. And so my mother raised 5 children. Again, I'm the youngest of 5. And growing up with my mother for those first 8 years of my life, we experienced a lot of soup kitchens and homelessness and moving around from home to home and school to school. And so it got to a point where we were moving from shelter to shelter, and we were staying with my older siblings who were older at that time, who had children of their own. And there was some other things going on, which brought the attention of Department of Children and Families to the house because of how many of us were in the home. There wasn't enough space for all of us. And so because of that, and my mother didn't have somewhere she could take myself and my brother, who's second in age, he's right above me. We went into foster care. My brother went into a group home. He was a teenager. And I was younger. And so that is the start of how did I get in foster care? Why did I get in foster care?
Okay. So you kind of gave us I use this word nuggets, you dropped some nuggets there. And one of the biggest things is what we are seeing to start to develop in the prevention part of child welfare is understanding and highlighting the generational foster care, and the cycles that leads to that. So, understanding that, at some point you got to an understanding that your mom had been in care and her siblings have been in care. when you found that out, what was that like? You know, what was your thought process on that?
Wow, that is such a great question. I feel like every question you ask is going to be a great question. I'm still going to say that. So, I, yeah. So, man, where do I begin? So, as a, I think one is my personality and just my characteristics of who I am and my qualities. That I'm very empathetic and very understanding. Also, my education and my field I'm in as a social worker, and having the different perspectives of the system through each of those roles I've had also adds a layer of my understanding. And so when you just kind of combine all of that, I, it at times on one hand, right, I can be very frustrated and have certain expectations of either the past of how things should have gone or even the future. But it's this kind of dance going back and forth also, because on the other end I'm very understanding, and I can and I know pretty deep details about what my biological mother's, what she shared with me over the years, what her experience was like, and which was very different from my experience in the system. And so, it's a dance between, man, I went through some crap. Okay. That has impacted me of who I am today. And some of that being negative. But also, this level of understanding of like, but I get it. And, it sucks, And so, yeah, it's a very interesting place to be in.
Definitely, definitely. And I've asked this questions a couple of times when, I've had people I've interviewed and had on the show, and they kind of gave me the same, just saying, yeah, my parents were in a similar situation. And for me, my parents, first, I know, never went into the child welfare system, but they could have been a product of the child welfare system. Growing up in the hood, very low income, you pretty much could say poor. We was poor, and we made it by, when I look at my lineage, from my grandmother to my mom, I don't know much about my dad, other than him, but when I look back to that, and when I did my own journey towards healing, because I knew I wasn't going to get the questions answered from the individual people, I kind of just retraced their steps, and I found that, there was not a lot of nurturing happening. There was a lot of, you got to be strong, ain't no other choice, and that was left to my mom or my dad's interpretation of what that meant to be strong, what it meant to be a woman, what it meant to be a man. And when you leave that to a child's interpretation, that imagination goes wild. Now you translate that to, okay, now I'm not a kid anymore trying to figure out how to be. Now I have kids of my own, and I have to be a parent. How do I do this? We already face the stigmas about getting help from the child welfare system. We're already facing stigmas about how I'm supposed to look or appear to other people on the block, So all those different stigmas that are weighing decision making, I've seen a bit of hindrance of being their best self. And I say all that because, I don't excuse the actions of my parent because that was wrong, but I also beg the question to myself and to other people who have similar situations, that may be listening. What other choice did they have? What were they taught differently? Were they provided with resources that really dug in depth of how to be better parents? And those are some of the questions that helped me get to a place where, it's not okay, but at some point I had to accept that they didn't have anything better to get them, to have them be better, So yeah, that's my little tangent, and so forth. So, that's definitely something that I've seen to be a pattern, My next question is, because you mentioned, and I don't know, maybe it's just be clarification. So have you reunified with your mom, like, and built a relationship, presently, or?
So first I want to just say quickly, like what you just shared, just respond to that. It is one of those things when we are in discussions either with, and we share our experiences being a part of the system, and we find so many people who have gone through so much of the similar trauma that we've gone through, but they never made it to the system. And it's like they still went through all the same things, just they didn't join that system. And so it still makes an impact on you. It still makes an impact, as you get older. And to your point as well, again, walking that dance of like, when you understand that history and what this person has gone through, it's like, I understand and I can have this, compassion for you and this empathy for you. And that's if you're able to get to that point. But in addition, there's still these expectations. And even if you weren't able to meet them and you made mistakes in the past, how can you fix that moving forward? Which is a great lead into the question you just asked me. So I actually had always maintained a relationship with my biological mother from the day I went into foster care. And so we had visits, we had phone calls, and throughout the years, it may have been more of one than the other. And especially as an adult, it's primarily because she still resides in Connecticut and I have transitioned quite a bit in different states. And so a lot of that has been through phone, but we had always maintained a relationship actually. And I know probably later we'll kind of chat more about different parts of my experience, but one of the things is actually this past year, I had to make a very tough decision for my well-being, for my mental health. And when I say tough, it was extremely tough. But I decided to no longer continue that relationship with my biological mom. And so like I said, we had it for 30 plus years. But this past year, I actually ended that relationship.
Okay. And that's understandable. That is very understandable. I appreciate you sharing your honesty and being vulnerable and sharing that. And just like you mentioned, I want to kind of segue back to that journey and that experience. What? How do I answer this question? Let me track back. My mind is moving faster.
I know, me too. I'm like, okay, fast forward, rewind.
You entered into the system. What did that journey look like? Were you, what age were you first?
Yeah. So again, I have to go back and double check and really get that information, but I was around 8 or 9 years old.
Okay. So around 8 or 9, I know many people have many different experiences and there's many different facets. So what did that entail? Did you go to group homes? Did you go to a foster home where you thought about adoption in this process? How did that journey look like until age 18?
Yes. So I actually had a lot of long-term foster home placements. And so I lived with multiple foster homes, majority long-term, where there were a couple years each. And so I transitioned and from home to home, and my last home that I entered, I was about, I had to have been about 13 years old. And I actually stayed mostly with that home from 13 until I aged out, which actually was after 18, which we'll talk about. And not to jump ahead, but yeah, I stayed there until I aged out. And I say mostly because during those years, there were 2 different points where I left and came back. And so there was one moment where I left to go to another foster home and came back. And then there was a second moment where I left to go to an independent living program and I ended up coming back. And so, which both of those stories have a story of its own. But yes, that's pretty much been my transition from my foster care experience.
Okay. So, this is that moment when I dive deep, so, feel free if you're not comfortable with it, let me know. How receptive were you as a person who had experienced displacement and, some trauma there? How receptive were you to foster parents or ILP, or did you go in like, okay, this is better than whatever my other situation was, or were you like, nah, y'all tripping, and I'm gonna make this hard for y'all,
Well, first off, listen, I can be very vulnerable and transparent and dive deep. I'm always doing that on a regular basis. So please, by all means, let's do it. So just to say that first. And just because that's just who I am. And I also think you just never know. You never know who can really benefit from hearing you share something extremely vulnerable at the perfect time. And so anyways, so I would say that my transitions were shocking to me. Um, and after going to school and studying psychology for undergrad and studying social work for graduate school and learning about trauma and the impact that has on, your brain and your memory and all of that, I'm not going to lie to you. There are patches in my memory of both prior to entering foster care as well as my adolescent years and even some of my teenage years. And, some of that could have been just survival to protect myself from those traumatic, feelings and memories. Or it could just be regardless of trauma, maybe that's just how my memory would have been set up. But so yes, from what I remember, my transitions were very shocking. I don't remember a discussion prior. I remember going to school, seeing my social worker, showing up in the middle of the school day with my belongings in the car and being told I'm going to a new home. And, that's why I say that my transitions were very shocking. It really, from my memory, every transition, that's how it went. And so whenever I would see, it was a trauma response. When I would see my social worker at the school, even if it wasn't about picking me up to move me, I would associate that and I would be like, oh no. So that's kind of how those transitions happen. So number one, it was shocking. Number two, I would say what's interesting is my very first foster home. It wasn't the best, especially now as an adult and as a professional in the field and knowing best practices, knowing all that I know now, I'm able to recognize even more of how like that first foster home could have been much better. However, at that time, being an 8-9-year-old and having spent my first 8-9 years of my life in shelters, at times not having meals or eating at soup kitchens, or just that life I had lived. When I went to my first foster home, while it was traumatic, while I deeply missed my biological family, there was this sense of my basic needs are being met. And I have a bed to sleep on that's the same every night. And I'm going to the same school every day. And so there was a sense of like appreciation and gratitude about that. And so I don't know if it's fully that or if it's also some other feelings I had. But when I had those transitions, there was a sense of that as well. And so from what I remember, unless any of my previous foster homes want to call me out, I think I was a pretty well-behaved kid overall. And I think that I was pretty respectful and I at times could have been pretty shy, especially in the initial rapport building. But again, at times it was me just thinking about those basic needs and just appreciating that and wanting to be on my best behavior so that I can get those basic needs met.
Definitely. Wow. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think, the piece of, having to spend from a very young age time in a homeless shelter and different things. And not, I mean, I don't know if you know, why, but, I can imagine thinking back as a kid, like, huh, this is what my life looked like. And then I go to school and everybody else is like, this is what their life looked like, you know, that does something to you, and you don't really know the pick of it because this has been your life, So
And I would even add at the same time, you may feel some shame depending on the circumstances. I know for myself, some of those transitions, for example, maybe we were staying at a shelter and the school system was like, actually, you can stay at our school and we have a bus that goes to that area that can pick you up. And again, being a child, and getting on the bus that went in that area, it was a smaller bus. And so for, kids who take the yellow bus to school, who are in, areas like that, versus I'm referring to, because right now I'm in New York City and you take the subway or the, bus to school. But anyway, so I was questioned by my friends, like, why are you taking that bus? And so the yellow bus were for students that were either disabled or they had different issues. And so it was this transition of, you're taking a different bus now and it's a smaller bus. And so there was a lot of like questioning and even potentially, bullying and teasing. And at the end of the day, even if none of that had happened, it was my own internal shame and, not wanting to talk about, knowing that I was different and knowing that it wasn't something that people talked about. And so it was just a lot of internal feelings, that you can have during that time of the lack of home, the lack of food, the lack of transportation, the lack of all those basic needs.
Definitely. And it's a perfect point, to point out like that those feelings are real, and about shame, embarrassment, this is what my life is, and as a kid, you're like, we feel shameful and embarrassed about the slightest thing, if we get this one toy, that everybody else ain't got. So like, I don't want to invalidate or belittle that feeling, but I also want to, for the time, that age, to recognize, because I felt that, at a young age too, and I would say, for me, I created false narratives. And I'm pretty sure some of the other Foster alumni can relate to this. I created false narratives. My mom had 5 consecutive strokes when I was age 11. And, there was a period, before I entered specifically into the child welfare system that, I was going to school and stuff like that. My mom was wheelchair bound and everything like that. So, and my dad was wherever, so I'm a Black kid, going to school. And in order to prevent bullying, even though it still happens, I created a false narrative of what my household looked like, what my mom and what my dad looked like, because I felt ashamed. I felt embarrassed. And I wanted to do self-preservation, to make it through, because for me, school was a battlefield. A lot of people took it as refuge, and I didn't take it to refuge until my adult life going into college. I would be very real, which because I saw a value for me doing that, and middle school to high school, even some elementary, all that was like, I need to survive. These kids, got parents that pay for name brand this, all this other stuff, and they like, oh, you got on the Walmart jeans, and it was a very difficult time, and that was my experience. But it brings me to my next question. Were there any cultural or identity barriers that you faced because of your circumstance and going into foster care and what have you?
Yeah. So when I think about that, I am, and people who are listeners can't see me, but I am a white woman with red hair and freckles and blue eyes. And so there's no doubt that I am white. However, I was actually placed with primarily all but one of the homes were actually people of color. And so one of my very last homes, the one that I stayed with from 13 on, they are Puerto Rican. And there were lots of cultural differences amongst, all of those experiences. Luckily, Bridgeport is a pretty diverse city. It's one of the most diverse cities I've ever lived in, and I've been traveling and living all over the country. And so it wasn't necessarily a culture shock for me, transitioning from home to home. However, there were obviously things that were culturally different and that over the years I've either adapted to or I didn't, and who have made me who I am today. And so, yeah, I've had that experience. And actually something funny to tie it into what you were just speaking about, of this idea of, us discussing shame and creating a narrative to kind of protect ourselves. One funny thing, a story that I'd like to share is that I actually felt shame of being in foster care until I went off to college. And I can share that later, but it was in a program where I felt empowered to use my voice and find my voice and share my story and feel empowered. Ever since, I don't shut up about it now. But prior to college, I felt extreme shame and I didn't want to be identified as the foster kid. And so I felt that to the extent of lying to everyone. And when people, so in high school, my foster sister, which is my foster parents' biological daughter, who's just a couple years older than me, we had a couple years overlap in high school, and she clearly looks Puerto Rican. And my foster mother is on the darker side of Puerto Rican, and my foster father is on the lighter side. And so one story that I had shared with people, and my sister was on board, and my family, it wasn't even a discussion we had. It was like, I said it, and we all went along with it because that's what Deborah needed. It was no formal discussion, but me sharing that this was my family and thinking, how can I create a way and a story to make people believe it? And so I would tell people that my sister and I, because people in high school would ask, like, how are you guys related? How are you sisters? You look nothing alike. And the story was that we were sisters. We had the same mother, a different father. My father's white, and that's why I'm white. And my mother also, sometimes we would be in public and people would look, and either because of curiosity or whatever the purpose, may either just look or actually ask questions. And to protect me, and because she knew how I felt, she would make a joke out of it, actually. And she would say, oh, and this is like an old school joke, but so it shows her age, but she would say, oh yeah, I had her with the milkman. And so it it was a way, and I appreciated that so much because it was protecting me and my identity and all of that. And so, yeah, that's just to kind of relate the two things that we just talked about.
Definitely, definitely. Wow. I guess, segueing into that next part, while we're on this, what did mental health look like in the beginning of that journey? What did self-care look like? Was that even something on your radar at that age,
It wasn't on my radar. And if I did do things, I wasn't identifying them as taking care of my mental health or identifying it as, self-care. It wasn't until after undergraduate and transitioning into graduate school and on that I had really appreciated and focused more on my mental health and focused more on focus more on that. So during that time and during that transition in high school, transitioning into undergraduate, like I said, I think that there were things that a lifestyle that I created and programs I was a part of that naturally, had me in a pretty good space. And if I needed support, I knew what support was there for me, but like I said, it wasn't something, it was just not on my radar to really focus on that. And, even to deal with some of that childhood trauma at that time in my life.
Definitely. So did you age out? Like, what did that look like? And
Yeah.
what around that time? So I'm assuming, high 17, 17, 18, 16, around that time, what supports were there to kind of help you transition?
Yeah, so this completely changed my life. So I'm not going to lie to you. I completely value education now, but so I have to say that first before I share my personal experience, because man, so in high school, I did not take high school seriously. I didn't really think about college. I more so, it was very common in Bridgeport for a lot of people to go to their local community college. I didn't think about going off to get my bachelor's or my, a 4-year institution. And also I wasn't preparing for that. And so in high school, I missed a lot of high school for a variety of reasons, hanging out with friends, working. I had a couple jobs in high school. I was just, that was the reality of my experience. So when I graduated high school, or I was getting ready, I had a very low GPA. However, so the Department of Children and Families in Connecticut took its youth on a historically Black college and university college tour. And they brought us to numerous colleges going all the way down the East Coast and even, to some Southern schools going more west. And I went on Bennett College campus. It's Bennett College for women, all female, one of the 2 all female HBCUs. And I fell in love. At that point, I was probably 17, would have been around, it was either the end of my junior year or the beginning of my senior year. And I knew I had this sense that it was exactly what I needed if I wanted my life to change. So the college was a very small college. It had, on the tour, we learned about what programs it had, how it values sisterhood, it values community, it has a small teacher to student ratio, and just everything they shared. I'm like, I need this family, essentially. Like, if I'm going to do this, I need this support. And so I think that college tour I went on changed my life, opened me up to opportunities. I am forever grateful for attending, graduating, and benefiting from a huge network of sisters currently and family of Bennett College. And so I went to college and I benefited. So at the time, Connecticut provided funding for higher education. And while I was actually in my 4 years there, so many policy changes had happened. And so when I first went off, or I was getting ready to go off, at the time, it would have been 2008, 2009, they had funding for like foster youth who are for undergrad and graduate school. And then while I started, it was only undergraduate, but there was no cap on how much. Then in the middle of my program, they changed a policy and it was a cap on how much. And I was going to a private institution. So I had to, figure out a couple of things and had a couple of scholarships. So I was able, to make it work. But I say all this to say that college tour changed my life. Bennett College for Women in Greensboro, North Carolina changed my life. And it wasn't until I graduated in that following 6 months, I don't remember the exact time period, but that's when my case actually closed. And that's when I officially aged out of the system. So I aged out of the system, what was I, 22, maybe? I don't know, around there. So a bit older. And so I aged out after I graduated with my bachelor's in psychology.
Awesome. So this kind of segues me into the expertise part. I know, we've talked and you've done many different roles and facets in the child welfare system. So first, if you don't mind, kind of give me a list of those roles, and then we're gonna walk through how we got there and where we are now.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let me take a deep breath and get prepared. So, okay, so I graduated undergraduate so actually, let me pause here. So I had mentioned a bit earlier about it wasn't until I was in college that I felt empowered to share my story of being in foster care. And ever since, I will not shut up about it. And also have dedicated my professional career to making an impact on the system. And so it was through it was called the Black College Fund Ambassador Program that's affiliated with the United Methodist Church, that I would travel to conferences and give thanks and ask them to continue to provide funding to my college. But in that, I would tell my own story. And that's when I first started sharing my story of being in foster care and what that experience was like. And so in undergraduate, I was receiving my degree in psychology, and I just knew that I was ready for this career in child welfare. And at the time in psychology, I thought I would do this by being a child psychologist. So when I graduated, I started at University of Massachusetts. I went there for a year-long program where I took a couple graduate courses, but I also was employed. And I did research. And my research was in clinical psychology, and it was on several foster care related, child welfare, related research projects. But through my research, I found that if I really want to make an impact on the system, I should probably transition into social work. And it's not necessarily psychology, the way that I want to make an impact. And so I felt very limited being a child psychologist and doing psychology. I thought being a social worker, I can make an impact in so many other ways, which now that I share with all my roles, you'll see exactly that was true. So I ended up finishing that program, finishing my research projects, and applying to different social work programs. And so University of Michigan is and has been for many years the #1 school of social work program, the #1 master's, of social work program. And they also have a focus on child welfare so that you can receive a child welfare certificate. And so it worked out perfectly that I applied, got accepted through that program, got some funding. And so I found myself at University of Michigan, getting my master's in social work, also doing some research there in a child lab that's there focused on foster care studies and other child welfare studies. And I got my master's of social work in Michigan. And directly after graduating, that's when I started different direct service roles. So I have been before I actually go to the direct service roles, I focused my degree, it was on the child welfare, but also there was a focus on more macro level work. And so social work is so diverse, and you can be as micro level as a clinician when you're doing therapy, or even more macro level where you're doing policy work and things like that. And so my focus was on program evaluation and social policy. And so I have done, and I'm still a part of a program evaluation consulting company that does program evaluation and different work with nonprofit organizations. And so I started with that work, and I still do that as a consultant. But in addition, I have had multiple direct service roles. So I've been a foster care worker for the state of Michigan, specifically Wayne County. And so that was so eye-opening, because at this point I've done a lot of research, and so I have the personal experience, I've done a lot of research and have the education, but now, man, all these thoughts and the perception I've had of the system and of all those professionals involved being a foster care worker opened my eyes to so much and allowed me to gain that perspective from that angle and understanding the system in areas where it allowed me to take a step back and just think like, oh, this is why maybe previous workers in my personal life, in my childhood, may have done things a certain way, or man, this area really needs to change. Or as a foster care worker for myself, because of that personal experience I had, I'm going to do things a little differently. And so as a foster care worker, there were certain things that I was doing a little differently than perhaps maybe some of my colleagues. One thing I could think of in particular was I had a kiddo on my caseload who was in a residential facility. The residential facility gave us a notice he needed to be removed. And, I noticed that, and I spoke earlier to you about my transitions were a shock to me. I didn't want this to be a shock to him. And so I spent as much time as I could having the discussion with him, asking him if he had a choice, where would he want to live? Taking him to residential homes to say, what do you think about this one? And finding residential homes that could focus on his parts of his identity. And so that's just one example of like how I was able to come with that personal experience and that level of empathy and knowledge and understanding to be able to be a foster care worker. And so that was, again, a eye-opening experience. I soon transitioned out of that. That is at the same time, a tough ass job for anyone, but it also can be a bit triggering for someone who has been a part of the system. And so I left that position. I soon transitioned to an organization that I was able to manage their foster parent training program in the state of Michigan. And I also was a foster parent. It's a trainer, so foster parent, adoptive parent, all those kind of prospective community members that may need that training. And so that position I absolutely loved. I appreciate that. I felt like I was making a huge impact by being one of the first people that these families can communicate with and ask questions and receive education, receive knowledge before beginning this whole process and sharing my stories. It was both an amazing experience, an empowering experience, but it was also kind of therapeutic for me. It was therapeutic to use these experiences I had in order to make a difference. So I absolutely love that position. And now ending here, I also recruited foster parents too throughout the state of Michigan. So I transitioned to a new role as a program manager for a mentoring program in Ann Arbor, Michigan called Girls Group. And I continue to, on the side, sometimes recruit, but mostly train foster and adoptive homes. And so my last position I had in the state of Michigan was program manager for a nonprofit. We did mentoring services in the schools of Ann Arbor and out of the schools for Ypsilanti students. And that also was an amazing experience. Some of our students were in foster care, some weren't. And one of the things that I appreciated about that, and also tying that to something we discussed earlier, was interacting with youth, either if they're in care or not in care, right? And normalizing things that multiple kids may be going through, things that I had potentially gone through when I was younger. And so one of the things that I brought to that experience was making sure that I would normalize, as well as the coordinators that I supervised who ran the programs in the schools, make sure that they also tried to normalize and use their experiences for the youth. And so, for example, I very openly in the classroom would share when we would have different discussions, like, yeah, I was in foster care. Yeah, I aged out. And like, this could be a discussion. And it's just the shock that kids have on their face. Like, what? Like, you're sharing this vulnerable thing, but it's something that, man, imagine if I was an 8-year-old, 9-year-old in a classroom and my teacher said, yeah, I was in foster care. And imagine how maybe I wouldn't have waited until I was 21 years old to not feel the shame and to feel empowered to share my story. And so, I absolutely also love that position and loved what perspective that gave, to me. And now here we are. That I left that position almost 2 years ago, and I took a break to do some traveling. So I've done a bit of traveling and a bit of reflections and a bit of processing and thinking of what I want my career to look like. And fast forward to where we are now. I recently, as in the last like a week or two, just started 2 new positions, one of which is the business development manager at Fostering Media Connections, and one as a research lead for Think of Us. And so I just talked for probably at least 10, 15 minutes straight, and you probably have lots of questions, but I just threw it all at you. So that's where we are now.
Awesome. So, I wanted you to share that because it doesn't just speak to your resiliency and your perseverance to from where you have come from to where you are now. It it shows the dedication to growth, and trying to identify that path you want to be at, and putting yourself in the right position. I hear through your story and through your experience is bringing a chair to the table if the chair was not already there for you. And I can relate to that because there's many opportunities in my personal life where there wasn't a table, there wasn't a voice there for me, and I just look, I'm gonna be here and I'm gonna show up. So I don't know what y'all gonna do when I get there, but I'm gonna let you know I'll be there, on time, probably early. But I definitely can relate to that, and I just thank you for your dedication, for the audience, so you guys can get a perspective. Wayne County is I believe the largest county in the state of Michigan. The number of foster youth and cases that come out of Wayne County is far beyond the thousands. And I don't know what the caseload look like now, but I know, caseloads were very heavy, and they continue to be heavy. Turnover rates continue to be shocking, and I say all this is because, Wayne County sits, what most people know, Detroit. That's where I'm from, throw that out there real quick. Wayne County houses Detroit and many other cities, but Detroit has been impoverished and hit with many different things of drug epidemics, health epidemics, the recession and many other facets. I want to say since the 80s or probably before then, so a lot of what we're seeing, in similar cities throughout the country, aren't just today. We're seeing side effects of kids going into care. And like I said, with my story about parenting, it's that cycle. We're seeing that cycle play a part into kids that are going into care now, from, kids that probably should have been in care, or their parents didn't have the proper resources and stuff like that. So it's a cycle happening across everywhere. And I wanted to highlight that, because my family come from the South, and like many other families, came up north, for the GM, the Ford, working in the plant. They knew that it was dollars there, and stuff like that, and didn't have much, and tried to make something. So my family got here, it was about work, and getting things done and all this other stuff. So parenting took a toll. Being there for your kids took a toll. Supporting them and being nurturing took a toll. And I am the product of that toll, so I say all that to come back, reeling it back to a circle. Thank you for sharing your truth and your honesty. Now, for the sake of time, I'm gonna, try to grasp this together. You took a trip, and trying to figure some things out, but also I'm pretty sure it was, trip for fun, just take a little self vacation. I hope it was some fun in there. I hope it wasn't, I need to, focus. I hope, you took some time for self, but also now coming back, and identifying where you want to be and how you want to do it and what are you doing it for. You know, you're working with two well-known, you know, established organizations. And you know, I, I know from Think of Us, and I believe I've seen a little bit of work. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Foster Media. I'm saying it all wrong. I don't have the whole
Fostering
name.
Media Connections. Yep.
Yes. Because I know two organizations as Foster Media something, so I didn't want to mix it up. So I know there's been a lot of circling around COVID and supporting youth and all these different things, stuff like that. So first I want to touch on your personal experience with COVID, and then now, because COVID is still happening, what does that transition to the working world again, you know, after your break, look like for yourself? And now you have a newfound sense of what mental health and self-care look like. What are you preparing yourself for, and what have you?
Yeah, so yes, I did have some fun on that road trip. But to acknowledge that. So that time I took off was because it was the middle of the pandemic, so right when COVID hit, and I recognized that I was ready for change. I was ready for growth, and not just change with my employment, but I was ready for my environment to change. So my location, I was ready for just so much. I just was ready for a change. And part of that was because I had, you know, stress can impact us in a lot of different ways. And I was having physical symptoms of due to stress that had no explanation other than stress. And so I was having these symptoms, and I just thought, you know what, that led me to saying, I need some change. And when I thought about it, I was like, why not do some big change? And so I left my job. I gave myself permission to make this transition. At that point, people always ask, how did you afford this? I had saved up. I didn't know what I was saving for in the years leading up to that, but I had saved up a bit. And I had always had the goal to finish visiting all of the 50 states by my 30th birthday, but COVID hit and it ruined lots of things, just like it ruined a lot of things for other people. So when you combine all of that, I had made the decision to leave my job, sell all my belongings, and to travel and to finish visiting all the 50 states. And initially it was going to be a much briefer journey. However, while I was on that journey, you know, I find myself to be very spiritual, and you could say a little religious. But I just noticed that I was on the right path because God continuously opened up doors for these travels to happen and to extend and to show that I didn't need to rush through this. And so on one hand, yes, I did have a lot of fun, but I also spent this time to deal with so tying it back to mental health and with COVID and everything, I spent this time to actually deal with things that I had been able to avoid and suppress in all the years prior because life had been hectic. And I know a lot of people can relate to that. COVID slowed things down. COVID made people face things that maybe they had been avoiding forever. And so I wasn't working during this time. I was traveling. Some locations I would spend a month in, and some locations I would spend a couple days in. It just depended on the location because I didn't want to spend a month in some of these states. But then there were some states where I would have loved to, and I did. And so anyways, I spent that time traveling to do the hard work of the facing issues that I, again, had been suppressing, the trauma I had gone through that I didn't realize were impacting me in multiple ways, the relationships that were not serving me well, that I had to really take a swallow and just say, you know, what are you going to do about this? Like, and so I actually ended several relationships, which were multiple relationships that were huge people in my life. And again, it was the hardest thing, but it was a long journey. It was a long process. And so during that time, I had to make my mental health my priority, my physical health my priority, my emotional health, all the health. Health was the priority. And while I also was working on some goals of mine, studying for my social work license exam and a couple other goals of mine, and just processing a lot, getting back in therapy where I could talk through some of these things when I was ready to make these decisions and have these difficult discussions with people. And the last thing that I would say about this time was it allowed me to dream big. It allowed me to envision, what do you want your future to look like? You already know what area you want to work in, but what do you want it to look like? So I had so much time being able to travel, to be out in nature. I was hiking in every national park you could think of. I was sitting, as you know, whenever I was on the coast, especially in California, I was sitting watching the sunset every night and just having time to process and think about what I wanted that to look like. And so Michael, you and I connected maybe about a month ago because my travels had come to an end, and those funds, really the funds had come to an end, not my travels, because you know it was the funds coming to an end. And I said, all right, you got to get get some money, you got to figure this out. And so I relocated and I'm staying with some friends in New York City, Brooklyn, and I had all that time to think about it. And that is when I started networking and getting familiar with what work is being done, getting familiar with what other foster care alumni who's in child welfare, how did they get where they are, what organizations are doing what work exactly. And so just networking. And so that is what led me to be on this podcast with you. That's what led me to the different opportunities that I now am employed with. And I'm sure we'll have a effect with future opportunities. And so yes, I am very thankful that I have had that time, and I currently have this time to focus on a lot of those needs and to step back into, this work field, and specifically in an area I'm really passionate about and I'm really excited to join with a clear mission.
Definitely. You kind of answered one of my questions in that last piece, so I'm gonna just go to my final question. Is what tips and tidbits do you have for social workers, and for foster care alumni and youth?
That's a good question. And that's a great question to end on. All right, when we say tips about child welfare, tips about life, because I could go on about all my tips. So I think for foster care alumni, a couple things, because of my experiences and things that I have found helpful to set me up of where I am today, would be things that probably most foster care alumni are already doing. But if they're not, they might benefit from hearing this and considering it. And so I think that part of what allowed me to succeed and to get to where I am today has been being open, being vulnerable with my story, being vulnerable with my growth and where I'm at or where I want to go, being authentic. And with that is networking. Connect. And with networking, it's, for me, I don't have a connection to biological family. And when I think about family, it's my chosen family. And it's those that over the years that I've been able to get close with, that I have been able to be vulnerable with and trust. And they have done the same with me. And I've been able to develop this chosen family that I can spend holidays with, that I can depend on when I need support. for example, right now I'm staying with a friend, in Brooklyn that I've met when I studied abroad in 2011. And, during this time, you typically think you would go, if you needed somewhere to stay, you would go with family. But for some of us, we don't have that. And so for me, it's being your authentic self, being vulnerable, being trusting to those that you develop a relationship with, and making sure you're intentional to develop a chosen family, and also networking and getting mentors and being a mentor, returning that back to the community as well. And so I think that those are my top tips, and part of that is being vulnerable, asking for help, asking for support, asking for resources. Listen, I'm the number one person. I will try to ask for every support resource. I am a coupon code queen. Okay. I'm all for it. If it exists, I mean, why not? Okay. So yeah, that's my main tips for alumni. And for professionals, take care of yourself. I think it's really important to practice self-care, to take care of your mental health, especially in all these different child welfare roles. Taking care of yourself. What else would I say? I think that a recent discussion, and especially in some areas they still haven't had the discussion, but making sure that we are prioritizing those with lived experiences. And so if you're a professional at a child welfare organization and you are making all these decisions and impacting all these children and families, but you don't have many people that either look like those that you serve or that have lived experiences, I would really encourage, professionals to advocate for their organization to make sure that they consider this, and that they, make sure that there's a seat at the table for those who represent those that they're serving. So I guess those would be my tips.
Definitely. I appreciate that. And I just appreciate you, connecting with me and, being able to see your journey, I get excited, and I'm young, I seem older than I am, but I have to remind people I'm 24. But I learn from other people's experiences. I had my wild times at a young age, and I finally am in a place where I'm like, I'm just gonna sit back and watch. I'm gonna do my part, and I'm just gonna watch because I can learn a lot from other people's experience, and that's one of the biggest things about this podcast is hearing other people's experience, their stories, their journey. I'm also listening and hearing, and validating that experience, but also I'm taking that in personally for myself because as a 24-year-old, there's still a lot of growth I have to go under. There's still a lot of mistakes I still have yet to make. There's still a lot more barriers that I'm probably going to face, career-wise, personal-wise, so knowing that that is yet to come, I'm taking in every tip and tidbit, every piece of someone's individual story, whether they're younger than me or older than me, to be a better man each and every day. I'm a Christian man, so I try to, walk a righteous path. But I know a lot of people say this, but I seriously say this, that I'm a Christian under construction, because although I would love to be perfect in every aspect each and every day, I know that is almost a impossible effort, So I say all that to say, we are all on this journey to self-discovery and continuous self-discovery. And I believe that we all find a place where we're supposed to be, and we meet people that we're supposed to be with, but also we are on a planned purpose that is far beyond us, and that's something that I learned in young age that all the work that I'm doing is not for myself. All the things that I've been through is not for myself. I've seen direct effect of me telling my story affect 10 other people. Yeah. And to see that for my own eyes has been a very wow and awing moment, because I'm like, I don't know if any of you guys have been there, listeners or yourself, Deborah, where you're at a place where you like, am I doing the right thing? Does this even matter? Why am I even doing this? For me, I have been in that place multiple times, and I've worked side jobs and continuous advocating and so forth. So a lot of people, when I speak to my story, I had been advocating why I was still in the shelter. A lot of people asked me at that time, working 3 jobs, being in the shelter, why are you still being a part of the youth leadership, or why are you still advocating? You should focus to be somewhere else, and everything like that. And I was like, I'm prioritizing my time. I'm managing. I'm making sure the bills and all that stuff is paid, and I'm doing what I need to get out of this place. But also, I feel a need to give back because that's my ministry. I may not be in the best, greatest position, but I know that there's something I needed to do. And in that time, it was a very confusing state for me because when you have so many naysayers and so many negative aspects, you can't help but to think like, all right, am I doing the right thing? Like, is this where I'm supposed to be? Um, and I finally got a realization that, um, I don't care what nobody got to say. Somebody else got to say. Um, it's really about my own truth and my own experience. And I hope I don't make nobody mad, but that is the reason why this podcast is here today. Each and every youth, each and every social worker, each and every CEO, all in all, stakeholder in this child welfare arena has their own truth and why they are here and what they're trying to do. Um, and that is why this platform is here, to be able to share those truths and those experiences to their ability, and what those look like, in hopes that it educate and promotes reform and changes that needs to happen. This has been Resilient Voices and Beyond. I want to thank you for being on. I hope that I can have you on again as your journey continues to grow, and go forth. And I say this all the time. COVID is out there. It's doing its thing. Be safe. Take care of yourself. Think about getting vaccinated. Go ahead and do it. If you're not, that's your choice. That's your prerogative. I'm not gonna get political, but make sure that you're doing what you need to do to stay safe and take care of your village. Whether that's wearing a mask, whether that's taking proper precautions, washing your hands, or whatever that may be. Do what you have to do, because it takes all of us to take care of each and every one of us. So just continue to do that. Thank you guys for the support, and you guys have a good night, good evening, good morning, good whenever you're listening to this. And it's been a pleasure.